All right, well, welcome back. You can see that it is well after Christmas, and yet I have my little Christmas tree here. And that's because after getting back from my vacation and going back to work, I didn't feel like I had had enough kind of Christmas spirit or festivities. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to start a tradition that I've wanted to start for a while now. And that is to get a Christmas tree that is a live fruit tree in a pot and decorate it in the house. I've got a couple ornaments on here and the lights, of course, and a little angel down here. And then after I have finished with it for the Christmas season, to actually plant it in the yard and start a kind of Christmas or holiday orchard, because you're supposed to plant trees in the wintertime, I think, anyway. And then I might add like a plaque or something saying what year it is from. And then as the years go on, I can have Christmas trees from every year growing there and producing fruit year round, which I think would just be a really fun thing to do. So though I might move kind of soon, I thought I might as well start this tradition now. Even if I plant this tree in the yard and never get to see it bear fruit, I can at least know that I've done a practice run and it will be there for somebody else's enjoyment. So I am excited about that. It's been a long time in coming. But I'm also excited to go through another of George MacDonald's Unspoken sermons today. It's not Sunday right now, but I have a pretty busy day tomorrow, so I thought I'd go ahead and go through this one while I have time tonight. And that is a bit of an ask because this one is actually pretty long. It's actually over 14 pages long compared to 2.5 pages from our previous one. But before I get started, I thought I'd say something that encouraged me a little bit while also frustrating me. I, in preparation for this, was listening to the audiobook version of this sermon. And as I was listening to the guy's cadence, I was like, I feel like he's maybe not understanding what he's reading, because MacDonald is a bit of a dense and verbose and kind of confusingly worded guy sometimes. And I felt that the reader was just kind of brute forcing his way through all the words and not actually understanding what they said. And my suspicion was confirmed when I was listening and noticed that he completely changed some words, and the change of the word made it such that the sentence did not make any sense at all. Changing words like forfeit to fortified. And also, more hilariously, he changed the word goeth to Goethe, because they're spelled kind of similarly if you're not paying that close of attention. But I'll see if I can find the page. He said, that which God is, known by what Goethe out of his mouth. Known by what goeth out of his mouth makes a lot more sense, I think. But I feel like these have been difficult for me to understand at times, and I thought it was maybe just me. But seeing that a professional audiobook reader was also struggling with the reading of these, I feel a little bit better about my reading of them. I try to understand everything that I'm reading, and that's one of the reasons I jump around through the text and cut out some of the things just to clarify bits of the text that would otherwise be maybe burdened by his verbosity. Anyway, I thought that was funny enough to share. I just love that. By what Goethe out of his mouth. And the title of this sermon is called The Temptation in the Wilderness. And MacDonald begins this sermon with a quote from Matthew 4:1 through 11. Let's see if I can read this in the lighting that I have. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again the devil taketh him up into an exceedingly high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil leaveth him, and, behold, angels came and ministered unto him. So that was a large beginning text, and as I said, this sermon is comparatively large. But the sermon basically follows the 3 points of temptation that Jesus had here and talks about them each in turn. However, MacDonald wants to begin a little bit differently by addressing something that most people probably haven't thought of, and that is who actually told this story. There are only 2 people in this narrative, Jesus and Satan, and so either one of them wrote the story down, or they conveyed it to somebody else who wrote it down, or it is utterly fabricated, which is not an argument that MacDonald makes, but he does point it out, saying that it is a logical possibility. So before I botch his words any further, I'll start reading. He says, This narrative must have one of 2 origins. Either it is an invention, such as many tales told of our Lord in the earlier periods of Christianity, or it came from the Lord himself, for, according to the story, except the wild beasts, of earthly presence there was none at his temptation. So he's talking about a lot of inventions, many tales that are told of our Lord in the early periods of Christianity, and there are lots of those, either ones that are found in the Apocrypha or ones even found outside the Apocrypha, and you get a lot of interesting early church heresies based off of those, and there are some great courses on the Great Courses Plus about early Christian heresies that are really helpful to kind of understand the context in which the scriptures are written. So he says that either some random person made up the story, or Matthew made up the story, or it was Jesus himself who told the story. As to the former of the 2 origins, aka that a human wrote it, he says, the story bears upon it no sign of human invention, and he just dismisses it that way. And so he proceeds saying that this was a story that Jesus conveyed himself. He says, With this in view, I ask you to think how much God must know of which we know nothing. Think what an abyss of truth was our Lord. Skipping a little, he says, Must he not have known, felt, imagined, rejoiced in things that would not be told in human words, could not be understood by human hearts? Was he not always bringing forth out of the light inaccessible? Was not his very human form a veil hung over the face of the truth that, even in part by dimming the effulgence of the glory, it might reveal? That's a really interesting way of putting it. Like, Christ's human form is the dimming of God's glory, that it may reveal, that we may see it. So then it goes back to MacDonald's earlier idea of partial revelations, partial in order to be true. And I don't think that diminishes Jesus's role in any way. In fact, that it elevates it. Because though he is dimming God's glory in a sense, it is in an effort to make it visible to us. I just thought that was a pretty fun way to start this, just talking about Jesus as an abyss of truth from which he's always bringing things out for us. But MacDonald is talking about this because he says, with how much he had going on behind the scenes that we can't understand, we probably have no idea what he was going through in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. He says that there is no attempt made to convey to us even the substance of the battle of those 40 days. And in reference to the end of those 40 days, when our story actually kind of begins, he says, emerging from the storms of the ocean of divine thought and feeling into the shallower waters that lave the human shore. And so he's going into shallower waters that he can actually tell us a story about and that we can kind of understand. But in order to make us understand them, MacDonald says that Jesus is actually employing a parable here, which might be fighting words for some folks, but I think he makes an interesting and valid point. He says, the inward experiences of our Lord, such as could be conveyed to them at all, could be conveyed to them only in a parable. For far plainer things than these, our Lord chose this form. The form of the parable is the first in which the truth will admit of being embodied. So kind of going back to his idea that symbols can express truth better than mere logic. He's saying that parables are kind of like one of these symbols, so that they can convey more and deeper meanings than just argument or literal narrative. He continues on, "Is he who asserts that the passage contains a simple narrative of actual events prepared to believe, as the story, so interpreted, indubitably gives us to understand, that a visible demon came to our Lord, and, himself the prince of worldly wisdom, thought, by quoting scripture after the manner of the priests, to persuade a good man to tempt God? Thought, by the promise of power, to prevail upon him to cast aside every claim he had upon the human race, in falling down and worshipping one whom he knew to be the adversary of truth, of humanity, of God? How could Satan be so foolish? Or, if Satan might be so foolish, wherein could such temptation so presented have tempted our Lord? And wherein would a victory over such be a victory for the race? Told as a parable, it is as full of meaning as it would be bare if received as a narrative." I'm going to say that one more time. Told as a parable, it is as full of meaning as it would be bare if received as a narrative. So if it's a narrative, then Satan's just being ridiculously simple in thinking that his feeble temptations would actually be a temptation to Jesus. So he says that, therefore, this should be taken as a parable, and in doing so we can get a lot of rich meaning out of it, which I'll talk about. Now, if that weren't controversial enough for you, MacDonald goes on to say that while Jesus conveyed this story to the disciples, we might not have it exactly as he conveyed it. So bear with me as I read his argument for this. He says, "Our Lord spoke then this parable unto them, and so conveyed more of the truth with regard to his temptation in the wilderness than could have been conveyed by any other form in which the truth he wanted to give them might have been embodied. Still, I do not think it follows that we have it exactly as he told it to his disciples. A man will hear but what he can hear, will see but what he can see, and, telling the story again, can tell but what he laid hold of, what he seemed to himself to understand. So the disciples can only convey what they grasped of what he told them, but he thinks that this won't be very perfect. His effort to reproduce the impression made upon his mind will, as well as the impression itself, be liable to numberless altering, modifying, even in a measure decomposing influences. But it does not, therefore, follow that the reproduction is false." So he's saying it might be altered, but still true. And that sounds strange, and he's going to give an illustration which might clarify it a little bit. He's going to say that the stars are very massive and wonderful and majestic bodies, but seen from here, they're just little pinpricks of light. Our vision of them is still true, but it's not the actuality of what they're conveying. It's just, we see it from a distance, and so it's altered. He says, "The mighty hosts of life-bearing worlds, requiring for the freedom of their courses and the glory of their changes, such awful abysses of space, dwindle in the human eye to seeds of light sown upon a blue plain. How faint in the ears of man is the voice of their sphere-born thunder of adoration. Yet they are lovely indeed, uttering speech and teaching knowledge. So this story may not be just as the Lord told it, and yet may contain in its mirror as much of the truth as we are able to receive, and as will afford us sufficient scope for a life's discovery." And he adds, "The modifying influences of the human channels may be essential to God's revealing mode." Wow, that's a strong statement. That the modification itself in the conveyance might be necessary or might be a part of the plan all along. So this is obviously very controversial, I would say. But he's not even saying the Bible's errant. He's saying it's altered. He said it's not false, but it's just changed. And even saying the Bible is errant, though again that's controversial, is not in any way some sort of death knell for things. Because the Bible can still be authoritative, even if there are some transcription errors in different manuscripts, of course. And that's a whole nother fun can of worms. So now MacDonald's going to explore how Jesus could have been tempted by these seemingly silly offers that the devil makes. So first he says, if Jesus wasn't actually tempted, then the whole story kind of falls apart. But he continues saying, but asserting that these were real temptations, if the story is to be received at all, am I not involving myself in a greater difficulty still? For how could the Son of God be tempted with evil, with that which must to him appear to be its true colors of discord, its true shapes of deformity? Or how could he then be the Son of his Father, who cannot be tempted with evil? In the answer to this lies the center, the essential germ of the whole interpretation. He was not tempted with evil, but with good, with inferior forms of good. And he says, we shall see how the devil tempted him to evil, but not with evil. An interesting clarification. So now we'll see how the three temptations that Jesus underwent were tempting him towards some sort of lesser good and his responses to them. So the first one was that he was hungry, and the devil said, make bread of this stone. MacDonald says that there is no sin in wishing to eat, no sin in procuring food honestly that one may eat, but it rises even into an awful duty when a man knows that to eat will restore that lost vision of the eternal, will, operating on the brain and thence on the mind, render the man capable of hope as well as faith, of gladness as well as confidence, of praise as well as patience. Why then should he not eat? So eating is necessary both for our physical well-being, but also for our morale. And not eating, and like I would add, not sleeping and such, would and could lead one to either just not be able to think at all or just to despair. My mom always said that the difference between hope and despair is a good night's sleep, or in this case, a good stone's worth of bread. He continues, why should he not put forth the power that was in him that he might eat? Because such power was his, not to take care of himself, but to work the work of him that sent him. Such power was his not even to honor his Father, save as his Father chose to be honored, who is far more honored in the ordinary way of common wonders than in the extraordinary way of miracles. Because it was God's business to take care of him, his to do what the Father told him to do. To make the stone bread would be to take the care out of the Father's hands, and to turn the divinest thing in the universe into the merest commonplace of self-preservation. So it's his duty to do what God says. And you could say, well, God didn't say not to turn the rock into bread, right? But he explains that God told the rock to be a rock. Regard that word changed. The whole matter lies in that. Changed from what? From what God made it. Changed into what? Into what he did not make it. Why changed? Because the son was hungry, and the father would not feed him with food convenient for him. The father did not give him a stone when he asked for bread. It was Satan that brought the stone and told him to provide for himself. The father said, that is a stone. The son would not say, that is a loaf. And he has a footnote here that explains why he thinks that the multiplying of loaves and fishes was different from what he's saying here, because those were not being changed. But from what I understand, it sounds like he's saying he thinks that those would have naturally kind of multiplied themselves. I mean, I don't know if he's talking about fish reproducing, but he's saying that it was done faster than would otherwise be natural. But how do bread loaves multiply themselves? I'm not sure about that. But he thinks there's a difference, and you can explore that at the bottom of the page. It's like a half-page footnote, if you want to. He further explains here, saying, when a man tries to live by bread, and not by the word that comes out of the heart of God, he may think he lives, but he begins to die, or is dead. Our Lord says, I can do without the life that comes of bread. Without the life that comes of the word of my Father, I die indeed. Therefore he does not think twice about the matter, That God's will be done is all in his care. That done, all will be right, and all will be right with him, whether he thinks about himself or not. For the Father does not forget the child, who is so busy trusting in him that he cares not even to pray for himself. So here Jesus was tempted to mere self-preservation, and he easily rejects that because he trusts his Father and is there to do his bidding. So now we come to the second temptation. MacDonald says, "We now come to the second attempt of the enemy." MacDonald gives his own interpretation, quoting the devil as saying, "Then, if God is to be so trusted, try him. Fain would I see the result. Shew thyself his darling. Here is the word itself for it. He shall give his angels charge concerning thee. Not a stone shall hurt thee. Take him at his word. Throw thyself down, and strike the conviction into me, that thou art the Son of God. For thou knowest thou dost not look like what thou sayest thou art." He continues on saying, "It was a temptation to shew the powers of the world that he was the Son of God." So I guess the powers of the world would see it too, because if he threw himself down and a whole bunch of angels came and rescue him, it would be obvious, my guess. That to him the powers were subject, and that he was above the laws of nature, because he was the eternal Son, and thus stopped the raging of the heathen, and the vain imagination of the people. It would be but to shew them the truth, but he was the Son of God. What was his Father's will? Such was not the divine way of convincing the world of sin, of righteousness, of judgment. If the Father told him to cast himself down, that moment the pinnacle pointed naked to the sky. If the devil threw him down, let God send his angels, or, if better, allow him to be dashed to pieces in the valley below. But never will he forestall the divine will. The Father shall order what comes next. The Son will obey. So whatever God asked of Jesus, he would have done. But since he had not asked him to do this, he wasn't going to do it. And if God had asked him to do it, he would have done it without thinking of the consequences, because all that mattered is that he was ordered to. He says, "Faith is that which, knowing the Lord's will, goes and does it, or, not knowing it, stands in wait." Maybe a Milton reference. "Content in ignorance as in knowledge, because God wills, neither pressing into the hidden future, nor careless about the knowledge which opens the path of action. It is its noblest exercise to act with uncertainty of the result, when the duty itself is certain, or even when a course seems with strong probability to be duty." So, it is the noblest exercise of faith to act without concern for the outcome when you're certain of your duty, or even when you're pretty certain of your duty. And in that case, MacDonald has a footnote saying, "In the latter case, a man may be mistaken, and his work will be burned, but by that very fire he will be saved." And then this is an interesting sentence that he adds, "Nothing saves a man more than the burning of his work, except the doing of work that can stand the fire." I don't even know why I like that so much. Nothing saves a man more than the burning of his work, except the doing of work which can stand the fire. So the doing of work that can stand fire saves a man, but so also does the burning of the work if it's not able to stand the fire. I think that's a little bit too much for me to actually expound upon, but it strikes me for some reason. So he continues on saying, "Man's first business is, what does God want me to do? Not, what will God do if I do so-and-so?" So he says that it was not God's will that Jesus show off his Godhead in this way. It was not the way of the Father's will. It would not fall in with that gradual development of life and history by which the Father works, and which must be the way to breed free, God-loving wills. It would be violent, theatrical, and therefore poor in nature and in result, not godlike in any way. He says, it might prove so far the presence of a God, but would it prove that God? Would it bring him nearer to them who could not see him in the face of his Son? To say Thou art God, without knowing what the thou means, of what use is it? God is a name only, except we know God. Our Lord did not care to be so acknowledged. Inward sight alone can convince of truth, signs and wonders never. The truth must show itself in God's time, in and by the labor. The kingdom must come in God's holy, human way. Not by a stroke of grandeur, but by years of love, yea, by centuries of seeming bafflement, by eons of labor, must he grow into the hearts of the sons and daughters of his Father in heaven. The Lord himself will be bound by the changeless laws which are the harmony of the Father's being and utterance. He will be, not seem. And that sounds like a Faerie Queene reference again. In the Faerie Queene, I don't remember which book or even what character Spenser's talking about at the time, but there's a knight who doesn't care about appearances but only wants to be good. And of being good, Spenser says he rather joyed to be than seemen sich, for both to be and seem to him was labour lich. And that just means that he enjoyed to be good instead of seeming good, because to him it was the same amount of work to either be good or seem it. And I've always appreciated that as someone who sometimes gets judged by his appearance when I have my shaven head or like ratty clothes and stuff. I'd rather be good than have other people think me good. Anyway, I thought that was a fun little aside about his wording there when he says that Jesus would rather be than seem. And if he were to seem like the Godhead there, he wouldn't be fulfilling his role as that, as the Son, subject to the Father's will. And now we move on to the third temptation, which is an interesting one. He says, "We shall now look at the third temptation. The first was to help himself in his need, the bread. The second, perhaps, to assert the Father, jumping off the tower and being saved by the angels. The third, to deliver his brethren." In that one, MacDonald's talking about bowing down and worshiping Satan and then be given dominion over all the earth. So he explores the idea of what that would look like, what it would look like for Jesus to have been given command of all the earth by force. He says, "Could it be other than a temptation to think that he might, if he would, lay a righteous grasp upon the reins of government, leap into the chariot of power and ride forth conquering and to conquer?" And then he describes what that would look like and how he would vanquish evil by force, like I mentioned. I don't know how accurate it is because I know Tolkien only very imperfectly, but what I'm imagining in my mind is that scene from The Lord of the Rings where Galadriel imagines what she would do if she had the Ring of Power. And that's basically what he describes here, with Jesus kind of conquering everything and everything being subject to his righteous and good reign. Vanquishing evil, that sounds good, right? So he describes a grand holy war, a crusade that Jesus could have led, even saying, could he not mold the people at his will and have him fight this holy war with him against other nations? Sounds kind of scary and familiar. And MacDonald says, "I will not inquire whether such an enterprise could be accomplished without the worship of Satan," because that was a stipulation, of course. "Whether men could be managed for such an end without more or less the trickery practiced by every ambitious leader, every self-serving conqueror, without double-dealing, tact, flattery, finesse." He's like, it sounds like you're saying the worship of Satan is needed for such holy wars. But he's like, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not sure. "I will not inquire into this, because on the most distant supposition of our Lord being the leader of his country's armies, these things drop out of sight as impossibilities. If these were necessary, such a career for him refuses to be for a moment imagined." Alright, so he says he won't inquire about this, about whether you have to worship Satan to lead a holy war. But he will inquire about something else, and that something else is a sentence that is 1/2 page long. So I'll do my best to read some of this, but I won't read it all the way through. He says, "But I will ask, whether to know better and do not so well is not a serving of Satan? Whether to lead men on in the name of God as towards the best, when the end is not the best, is not a serving of Satan? Whether to flatter their pride by making them conquerors of the enemies of their nation instead of their own evils, is not a serving of Satan? In a word, whether to desert the mission of God, who knew that men could not be set free in that way, would not have been to fall down and worship the devil." So that last bit was actually from the end of the sentence, because I skipped over a bunch of other wethers that were in there. But I think the most powerful one of those is that he would ask whether to flatter people's pride by making them conquerors of the enemies of their nation instead of their own evils is not of Satan. I think that's something that bears thinking on. But for Jesus to not ride out in force and vanquish evil costs him. And of the cost of inaction, MacDonald says that it would cost pain of body and mind, yea, agony and torture, but those he was ready to take on himself. It would cost him the vision of many sad and, to all but him, hopeless sights. To all but him, hopeless sights. That's his universalism coming in, I think, again. He must see tears without wiping them, hear sighs without changing them into laughter, see the dead lie and let them lie, see Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted. He must look on his brothers and sisters crying as children over their broken toys, and must not mend them. He must go on to the grave, and they not know that thus he was setting all things right for them. So he must see all the wrongs and evils in the world and leave them as they are. And instead of forcing them to be right and vanquishing evil by force, he has to go give himself as a sacrifice, that all these wrongs may then be made right. Probably over the slow and gradual evolution that MacDonald talks about happening inside all of us. And MacDonald begins to conclude by quoting the Bible verse again, saying, "And when the devil had ended all the temptation, he departed from him for a season." Note that it says, he departed for a season. Then Satan ventured once more. When? Was it then, when at the last moment, in the agony of the last faint, the Lord cried out, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" When having done the great work, having laid it aside clean and pure as the linen cloth that was ready now to enfold him, another cloud than that on the mount overshadowed his soul, and out of it came a voiceless persuasion that, after all was done, God did not care for his work or for him. Even in those words the adversary was foiled, and forever. For when he seemed to be forsaken, his cry was still, my God, my God." And that's the verse that we'll begin the next sermon with. I really have appreciated getting to go through these again. There's a lot that I missed on my first read or two through these sermons. And that's just because he put so much into each one of them. But going through and trying to articulate what he's saying in each of them has really helped me pin down some things that had slipped past me initially. I hope that's able to be understood. And I know he can be dense with his wording, and he can have these things like half-page sentences here. So it's complicated for me to read and difficult for me to convey sometimes. But I hope some of it's able to get through, because what he says, I think, is important, and in a way that Lewis did. I was going to say what did appreciate, though, because Lewis loved MacDonald and, like I said, called him his master. But also Lewis understood the value of reading literature from different time periods. MacDonald was in the 1800s and had a different mindset than a lot of us do today. And Lewis says that by reading through different ages, we can help eliminate the blind spots of our current age. And where we see more clearly than a previous age, we can enlighten previous literature and such. So they say by having 3 different stones, you can make one of them perfectly flat by rubbing them against each other. The high points on each of the rocks will knock each other off as you rub them together in sequence. And that's how it is with ages, I think. We can have our high points knocked off by reading the literature of previous ages. So if you find stuff that MacDonald says grating, you think it's rubbing against your high points maybe, consider thinking on that and dwelling on it and see where a meditation will lead you with what he says. All right. Well, it's been a lovely time reading tonight, and I'll call her there. Merry Unchristmas from my cats and I.